I'm Lee Wheeler-Berliner, the Managing Director of the Colorado Workforce Development Council. The Colorado Workforce Development Council is a governor-appointed, business-led, public-private partnership with the purpose to advise, oversee, and integrate the work of the Colorado Talent Development Network. Our vision is that every Colorado employer has access to a skilled workforce, and every Coloradan has the opportunity for meaningful employment, resulting in individual and statewide economic prosperity. We engage with and support the EDCC because we firmly believe that economic development and workforce development go hand in hand, and the two must work together as key partners in order to realize the long-term economic impacts that we want to see within our state.
All right, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to EDCC's virtual series. Today we are exploring the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the shifts and the trends and the unicorns. My name is Kim Woodworth. I am the Operations Director for the Economic Development Council of Colorado. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. You've all entered into this webinar on mute for recording quality purposes. We encourage you all to ask questions from our presenters today. You can type them into the chat section at the bottom of your screen. Today's event is to educate, bring new ideas, and best practices forward. If you have any questions after this webinar, please send them to me at kim.woodworth@edcconline.org. We will follow up with today's webinar with a link to the recording and presentation. And we will also be posting it to our webpage that's dedicated to the Drive Lead Succeed virtual series. For those of you who are new to us, EDCC is a statewide industry association that supports economic development efforts across Colorado. We connect our communities, our members, and our partners to high-quality educational opportunities and trusted resources, and advocate for sound policies and programs that support a vibrant economy and enhance quality of life for all of Colorado. EDCC members come from a variety of settings. We are rural and urban, public and private sector, for-profit and not-for-profit, and include individual communities, counties and regional organizations, local and state government, chambers of commerce, universities, and private industry. EDCC is building a virtual arsenal of information to keep our professionals updated on the latest trends, data, and case studies. You can access all of the information at any time by visiting edcconline.org/past events. We'll drop that link into the chat section. EDCC has taken a hybrid approach to programming in 2021. We are coordinating 3 virtual series, 3 Knowledge Network series for the professional, and we'll be in person in Steamboat Springs for our annual Drive Lead Succeed conference October 20th through the 22nd. Early bird registration has launched, and so please, there is a link being dropped into the chat section, and so please follow that link to get yourself registered. Our sponsorship drive has kicked off after finalizing this year's events and programming. This is a great value in supporting our efforts in tackling our most perplexing issues and bring the information and resources to our professionals that is needed to spur innovative solutions at the local level. As a sponsor, you'll be recognized through our various platforms, video recordings, website, thought position papers, in-person meetings, and more. Links to everything I mentioned are populating in the chat section for those who are interested in learning more about EDCC and our programming. Now, without further ado, let's move on to today's programming, which is brought to you by the Colorado Workforce Development Council. As mentioned by one of our past speakers this year, we are dawning a new age that will bring economic opportunities unseen in the past century, somewhat akin to the Roaring Twenties. Innovation is charging ahead, creating newly anticipated technologies that will increase economic opportunities for communities, and economic developers need to be prepared for the coming wave. In the spirit of EDCC's 2020 virtual series began, we will tackle the difficult questions, analysis, and trends of the shifting entrepreneurial ecosystem, and by identifying the opportunities facing our communities. EDCC's events and programming, data, and communications committees are coming together to bring this one-of-a-kind virtual event to the heart that will explore the heart of these issues, provide the data to back up the theories developed in the exploration, which will result in a thought leader position paper that our professionals will be able to use to help guide conversations and actions at the local level. We are excited to share this report with our members, which will be released on August 16th. For those of you who aren't members, we hope by the end of today's event that you'll think about becoming more involved. In the near term, though, we will have this report available for a nominal fee. I'd like to introduce to you today today's moderator, Trent Thompson. Trent works for the Department of Commerce as the Economic Development Representative for Colorado and Utah. Trent works with community leaders and stakeholders to foster economic growth, create jobs, and ensure the region's competitiveness in a global economy. Trent's past life included the Department of Defense at the Northern American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, and U.S. Northern Command from 2010 to 2016. He led NORAD and U.S. Northcom's private sector office and worked with stakeholders to establish an all-of-nation approach to defend the homeland and support civil authorities in preparing for, responding to, and recovering from disasters. I think that makes Trent a superhuman, and we are also so very lucky to have him in our economic development world. Trent is a powerhouse volunteer to EDCC through his leadership on the board of directors and involvement with the Events and Programming Committee. He is the mastermind behind this topic today and brought together this esteemed panel of thought leaders that will support our efforts in the Thought Leader Report. Let's give Trent a warm Zoom welcome, clap, send out your emojis, whatever, but let's welcome Trent. And Trent, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Well, thank you, Kim, and I apologize for that massive head in front of your face right now. Next slide, that's great. But no, I feel very genuinely virtually welcome, so thank you. This is, my favorite topic, entrepreneurship. In my job that I'm in now, with working for EDA as Colorado's economic development representative and working with all of you here today on how you can improve your community's economies. I feel entrepreneurship is the one that crosses over all the Venn diagrams and really meets the goals for so many communities in when they want to grow their economies. You always have, the aspirational Amazon 2.0s or the other major manufacturer coming into an area, and you want that to happen potentially because you don't know if that's going to mesh with your culture or not. But you don't want to bet on it happening. You want to bet on your own community members, and that's where entrepreneurship and helping startups grow from within your community. That's where you get those primary homegrown jobs. So that's why I'm genuinely excited to have this discussion today. And while this is my favorite topic, naturally, we have some of my favorite people on the panel, true leaders in Colorado's entrepreneurship ecosystem. And before I introduce them, I'd like to kind of set the stage a little bit for our discussion today. So how we'll do this, we'll want to focus on the life cycle of how a startup becomes a thriving business, how a bill becomes a law, sort of thing, and talk about how it's working in Colorado and discuss the various perspectives of the expert panelists and examples of the businesses they support. And as we discuss barriers and opportunities of the businesses they support, we need to keep in mind the economic environment in which this is happening, an environment that has drastically changed this past year due to a simple, small, yet deadly virus that we all know the name of. And because of this change to our global environment, as the experts on our panel and talk about the barriers and challenges that new businesses face, I'd also like them to keep in mind and highlight any trends that they've seen over this past year that as we move into a post-pandemic economy. And there's a wooden table right here, so I'm going to be knocking on it after I say that post-pandemic. So today is about learning. EDC members, by definition, think and act on how they can help grow their communities' economies. And the information our panelists share with us today will help us do just that. It will help and provide invaluable information on how we can foster an environment that is conducive to homegrown, successful businesses. So without further ado, I will introduce our experts. We'll then have a discussion and ask some questions to each of them. And as Kim noted, we'll have a fuller discussion at the end, but we'll also have that discussion during. So as you have questions, don't hold back. Type them into the chat section, and we will inject them throughout the process. And remember, this is a learning opportunity. So I'm excited that we get to kick it off now, and we'll start with I'll introduce all of our members, all of our panelists, and then we'll go into discussion with them. So Mark Nagar is partner for Greater Colorado Venture Fund. co-founder of Startup Weekend and former CEO of Up Global and Chief Community Officer at Techstars. Since 2009, Mark has been a leader of the startup movement around the world. He has built and scaled programs that serve more than 500,000 entrepreneurs in over 700 cities and 142 countries. At Up Global, he managed a team of nearly 75 people with offices in 5 international locations and oversaw Startup Weekend, Startup Next, Startup Digest, Startup Week, and Startup America. He's just the startup. He's worked with grassroots and political leaders from around the world, as well as executives at many Fortune 500 companies around innovation and entrepreneurship. Originally from Mammoth Lakes, California, Mark now lives in Telluride, where he previously served as the managing director for the Telluride Venture Accelerator. When he's not working to change the state of rural economies, he's in the mountains. And well, by definition, you're always in the mountains if you're in Telluride. Next is Elizabeth Marsh, executive director for Southwest Colorado Accelerator Program for Entrepreneurs. Elizabeth is a Fort Lewis College business administration graduate. She has an extensive understanding of the region's resources for economic growth and the experience necessary to leverage these resources for new business development. She has overseen the creation of 31 new businesses in Southwest Colorado alone and has built the SCAPE Accelerator program into an award-winning, results-oriented engine for innovation and growth. Next, we have Delaney Keaton. As a Colorado native and rural resident, Delaney is honored to steward the inherent genius she believes exists because of living farther off the beaten path. Delaney is a seasoned creative entrepreneur and change agent. She successfully owned, operated, and exited her first company and has since been dedicated to fostering ingrained cultural values for art and innovation. As executive director of Startup Colorado, her mission is to drive greater coordination within the entrepreneurship ecosystem on behalf of rural entrepreneurs and the communities they call home. She is an unwavering believer in the potential of ideas, the people behind them, and the places they create. And last, and certainly not least, is Azrael Madrigal Chase, Program Director, First Southwest Loan Fund. Azrael is passionate about supporting the disenfranchised and underrepresented and has worked across nonprofit, government, and political sectors to promote equitable community and economic development. Azrael participated in Colorado State Department of Local Affairs Best and Brightest program, working with the city of Monte Vista on a variety of community and economic development projects. She's also worked on grassroots political campaigns and served on a regional board to brand and market the San Luis Valley. She graduated from Adams State University in Alamosa with a master's degree in public administration and was an involved student leader, participating in student government and serving as Adams State's Board of Trustees. She enjoys being an active member of her community and spending time with her pets. So this, everyone, is the dream team. This is when it comes to Colorado's entrepreneurship ecosystem. So let's take advantage of this wisdom and understanding of the ecosystem and learn how we can help our communities foster entrepreneurship. So with that, we'll go back to Mark. And Mark, let's start with you. And first, maybe if you can just talk a little bit about Greater Colorado Venture Fund and why it exists in the first place, and what makes it unique to other seed funders in the state and in the country. And then also talk about the competition that happened last week, because I know that happened last Friday. So go for it.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining and for having me here today. Yeah, a little bit about Greater Colorado Venture Fund. We're really on a mission to figure out how can we right-size venture capital for rural America. And starting here in Colorado first, I think we all can believe this is and agree that this is one of the best places to be starting and building a business in the country right now. That said, there's some real barriers in how we do things in the traditional venture approach, including the actual structures that we use. So we're doing traditional equity investing as well as some revenue-based investing, which is kind of a hybrid between debt and equity. That's been very successful for us. To date, we have invested about $8 million into 23 companies. And all of those are located in rural Colorado. Outside of the Front Range specifically, using our state economic development definition at least. We had the competition last week, the Greater Colorado Pitch Series, and this was really our first attempt at showcasing not just equity type investing, but we had 4 different capital tracks that companies and founders could apply to. So we had 2 early stage, 1 debt, 1 equity, and 2 later stage, 1 debt, 1 equity. And through that, we ended up having 8 finalists, 2 for each track, and 4 companies, actually 5, ended up walking away with more than $4 million. So beyond the capital actually getting deployed, we thought it was a way to also help educate and showcase the different types of capital for the different types of businesses. Because when we talk about the funding needs and the gaps in our ecosystem, right, there's no one size fit all approach here. And I think we got a lot of good feedback, and I think, again, seeing founders actually walk away with real money. Thank you, Azarel for Southwest Community Fund, and Delaney actually for being a sponsor with Startup Colorado. So it takes a village, and Elizabeth even from Scape had a couple companies that were in it. So even just showcasing on this panel how it came together in a single event in the last week.
Well, that's amazing. So before we move on to another topic, I want to kind of focus on the funding sources too. Obviously it's Colorado sourced funding that you just mentioned, and that Greater Colorado Venture Fund is part of. Do you see that as the norm when you're talking about seed funding for businesses that are scaling up, or do you see more funding coming from out of state? And what is there benefit to it being out of state versus in state, and vice versa? Is there a detriment to that too, or is there an upside to it?
Certainly. I think we've actually seen, especially through the pandemic, even more capital coming from local sources, be that local angel investors or institutional capital. We've even had a number of our founders that we work with directly that have specifically and publicly stated that they only want to be raising from sources in Colorado. I think we all have a lot of pride in where we are, and I think our ecosystem is at that tipping point. I think Agile Aerospace from Durango, who participated last week, was a great example. Most of their equity to date has all come from investors in Colorado, and then they received a $2 million debt from Greenline Ventures, and that's coming out of Colorado. 3 years ago when we started the fund, I couldn't have imagined that playing out as successfully as it has.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that also, my understanding, and it's a layman's understanding, but as you have local investors, they beget more local investors. And so you have that growth within Colorado, and that's what we want to see. So thank you for helping to foster that, I think. One thing I wanted to make sure we do kind of talk through in any way we can is I'm curious if you've seen any trends in the companies that you've been working with this last year, and any specific challenges or barriers that you've seen because of the pandemic. But as we're moving out of the pandemic, have you seen any examples that are of businesses, taking advantage of needs in the community because of what we've been living through this past year?
Yeah, I think specific to this last year, a lot of the impact has really hit many of our mountain towns, especially those close to outdoor recreation, as the world moves and rediscovers that in a much larger way. I think specifically for the companies, we're seeing talent is a really tough challenge. And I think housing is one of the systemic things behind that. Folks who are, whether it's Durango, Grand Junction, Montrose, Pueblo, Florence, we've heard of companies that have had trouble hiring and recruiting talent because they can't find places to live. And sometimes we like to think about those problems being unique or distinct to mountain towns. And I think in the last year, it's really accelerated and shown that it's a lot of the state. I think Trey Miller up in Sterling has a lot of great examples as well from Eastern Plains. We've even heard it in La Junta. So again, I think that's a big piece. Childcare is another one in the last year. Azarel probably has some great examples of companies they've worked with helping provide solutions there. But I think that's had a disproportionate impact in our communities, especially with mothers and the role that they've had to play stepping in. I know my wife and I have an 18-month-old and have felt that personally in a very, very real way, and a big challenge when it comes to, especially entrepreneurship.
Certainly. And that's maybe a good segue to reach out to Azarel and ask from your perspective, and it's a unique one. You mentioned in your discussion with Kim earlier this week about the opportunities that came about from the disruptions of the pandemic. Can you share with us maybe some work you've been doing with minority and women-owned businesses and finding niche markets in what they're doing?
Definitely, and thank you for that segue, Mark. I think that one of the things that we've noticed in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, especially in rural Colorado, is diversifying what entrepreneurship really looks like and really valuing those super small scale. Maybe it's a mom who started selling homemade candles as a side hustle. In addition to a full-time job or other things. I mean, obviously with the pandemic, we saw a lot of people be having to stay home or even if they were an essential worker, there was no childcare, there was no school, there was a disruption of like the natural order of how usually things were done. So a lot of what we saw was an increase in need to support women-led entrepreneurs at any level. So whether that was at a very small scale with technical assistance and small seed grants, to women that were ready to step out and make their business become their full-time job because of flexibility, because of time flexibility, because of a better wage, because of that flexibility to be able to be with their family and with their children and still focus on their business. So that those were huge trends that we saw. The other trend was the real need, which Mark kind of already hit on this, of childcare facilities. And how do we make these in-home facilities legal, or how do we guide them in the process? So how can we financially support them in becoming like legitimate daycare centers? So one of the things that we've done as an organization is partner with our local early childhood council to bring that capital to the table, and how do we address that gap? And that also creates those smaller businesses in these daycare centers and these women that are able to now manage a full-fledged legal up to code in-home daycare. So that's been another huge trend. I feel like I forgot the second part of the question. Sorry.
Well, I'm curious. Can you talk through maybe some of the examples that you've worked with businesses in your area that are addressed, and you're helping them to address these challenges like healthcare and childcare, and maybe just kind of highlight some of the success stories that have come out of the pandemic.
Definitely. So one particular business that comes to mind is by an amazing, amazing woman named Elena. And Elena has a sheep farm out of Capulín in southern Colorado. And she was actually working. She has a small child, a small toddler, and she was actually working, had a full-time job at the local university. And through being able to access capital and also the necessity of wanting to spend more time with her child and her family, she was able to get a low interest loan with us. And she built a full-fledged studio on her farm where she can take care of her sheep. And then she also sells natural sheep fibers that she hand dyes. And she has now, so this happened like in the midst of the pandemic, is now able to quit her job to be able to full-time focus on this business and scale it. And I see a lot of potential in her. And when we talked about small scale manufacturing in rural Colorado, her ultimate goal is to create sustainable wool clothing. So that's one success story that I'm really happy to share.
And that's amazing. And so taking that example or any others that you may know of, what are the types of support that communities across Colorado, not just in your community, but anywhere, can help those sorts of businesses move into reality? Because that you help them move from it being something they enjoy doing to actually being a full-blown business that could eventually scale up and maybe hire more their own employees. Do you have any ideas of how communities can help foster that?
Yeah, and I think it's a multi-pronged approach, and I think it kind of also how Mark said, like it takes a village. One of the things that we've noticed is for sure that meeting entrepreneurs where they're at. So not everybody's going to be in the same place. Not everybody's ready to make a $200,000 investment into their business. It may start as a small scale project or thing, but again, we don't want people to have expensive hobbies. How can we make this thing that they're doing, that they're passionate about, and create it into a money generator, not only for them, but hopefully scalable, so they're also able to bring jobs into their communities. And the things that we've seen is, again, meeting people where they're at. And that sometimes can mean bare minimum, like they've been doing this as a side thing, but they've never actually registered the business with the Secretary of State because they don't know what the process is. So it's really meeting them with a technical assistant, which sometimes can be the bare minimum, the bare start, and then also introducing them into other educational opportunities that are relevant, but also culturally competent. Because historically, entrepreneurship and access to business or ownership has left out BIPOC and women communities and Native communities. And one of the things that we've seen to be really successful is creating these loan funds that are specifically targeting those specific entrepreneurs so they feel supported, but they can also make an entrepreneurship community with other folks that have had the same experiences as them, so they can create that support system. So really looking at supporting the entrepreneur's social and emotional needs, while also providing that technical assistance for that financial, logistical business side.
Oh, that's amazing, and thank you. And I'm an anachronistic person, so we've gone from Mark, who is like the tail end, where you're able to really move into scaling and getting millions of dollars in investment in projects, back to Azrael, where you're talking about the brainchild of a business, and you're helping them get to that point where they can scale. So now I want to move in and bring Elizabeth into the picture, because I think she naturally bridges the two, in the sense that you're able to work with these businesses that have become businesses and want to strengthen their business model. And I think, and so before I speak any more for you, Elizabeth, can you tell us a little bit about Scape and what you do and how you do it? How did you get 30 businesses in the southwest part of the state to thrive?
Oh, thank you so much for hosting this panel. It's a wonderful opportunity to connect with everyone. So Scape is an 8-year-old initiative out of Southwest Colorado to try to tackle how do we create more businesses that will create more jobs. And so we run the program through 2 different arms. We have a nonprofit arm that provides the mentoring, technical assistance, and resources to businesses that they need. And we also have a for-profit investment fund arm where local angel investors have pooled their money to support these companies so they can get off the ground. You know, our model has shifted over the last 8 years. You know, we began kind of copying the bigger accelerators like the Techstar model of fast and furious, a few months, same amount of money. And then we realized for our area, we needed a much longer program and different types of capital for different businesses. And so we shifted our program to be a 6-month program where we work with the business, everything from their business plan, marketing plan, hiring, financial forecasting, and then we make investments at the end of the program. Because we were seeing that there's some companies that fit the fast equity model. Others, it makes more sense to work with them on revenue sharing or pair them with local banks for small business loans. And so we have only served kind of 5 counties in Southwest Colorado. We've opened up to working with companies out of northern New Mexico as well. But because of our small target area, we serve all industries and all level of businesses. And so every year we get about 50 local applicants that are looking for assistance, which is such an exciting testament to how much entrepreneurial activity is out there and that people are seeking resources and guidance to help them get off the ground. So we work with everything from product companies, manufacturing, technology, software companies, to try to help them all grow at different stages. We're also a little unique in that we have a very long-term relationship with the companies that we work with. We'll work with them for 1 program year, but we continue to support them through usually the next 2, 3, or 4 years as they expand and raise additional capital, continue to hire out and grow. And so we've really seen a lot of benefits from kind of the all hands on deck long-term approach to helping these companies get started and raise different amounts of money at different stages they need.
Well, that's amazing, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that. I know Randall had mentioned in the chat that supply chain obviously issues have been stressing inventory. So I know that some of the businesses you've been working with, Elizabeth, have been in the manufacturing standpoint. I think across the board, probably Mark, as you as well. But can you maybe talk about some of those businesses that and some of the challenges they've faced in starting up, and how supply chain has been a factor in that buildup?
So it is interesting how many niche manufacturers that we're seeing in Southwest Colorado that are thriving. And so some of our companies have had those supply chain challenges and small increases in costs to produce their products. But it actually, for the companies I'm familiar with in our region, it hasn't been tremendous. It's been just a few months of delays to get final numbers, and then probably about 10 to 15% increases in their supply to build their products. But that, I want to caution, is just the businesses, probably 6 or 7 manufacturers that we've worked with around here. I do echo what Mark was saying about hiring. We see that as a tremendous, it's very hard for businesses to build out their teams of the people that they need in Southwest Colorado. And it's kind of an interesting, some businesses are approaching it as, well, then I will relocate people here because while the housing is expensive, it's still a lot cheaper than where these people might be coming from. So it's a very interesting time to kind of help these companies build their teams.
Both a challenge and an opportunity. Absolutely. I think we've seen some companies really lean into it and find that they're able to recruit or identify new folks who have recently moved to town and have a leg up versus where their bases might have been previously.
Yes, and one of the other kind of opportunity and barrier that's really kind of interesting. Everyone's aware of all of the urban flight to small rural communities right now. The silver lining of that, though, is I have been just inundated with people that are moving to Southwest Colorado, usually the Durango area, that want to be investors, that want to be mentors, that want to know how to engage in the system. And so while these people are coming here and could potentially be driving up housing, they are also giving back so much to the community. I mean, in just the last 2 months, I've had 13 new people that somehow found me because of stories about our companies that have said, I want to invest, I want to support. And so it's an exciting time that way, but there's ramifications of that as well.
Awesome. Well, before we move on to Delaney, who I want to move into real quick, I want to ask if there's any specific company or startup that you want to highlight that has kind of succeeded through this last year and you're particularly proud to have supported.
Probably Impact Fenders. So that is, they're a local manufacturer of a new style of dock bumpers for the marine industry. And we've helped them raise several rounds of money to build out their facility, buy their equipment, do their hiring. At the height of the pandemic, they and many others, had a complete halt to all their trade shows, all their industry events, all of their, game plan of how they were going to find their customer and how they were going to make their products. But they were able to pivot quickly to selling direct to consumer online and have their best years ever. And to the extent they had to find a bigger facility and hire even more people. And so it's just so exciting of how they overcame no trade shows, no boat shows to still distribute their product and sell it to their customers.
Amazing. Awesome. Okay, well, I want to shift to Delaney, and Delaney, I think I would love to hear your thoughts on the kind of we've been talking about, but I do have a question on unicorns, because I've heard the term often, and I know in the fantasy world what they are, and I've been told they poop rainbows, but I think that they mean something different in the entrepreneurship world. So maybe if you can talk about what a unicorn is, but then also talk about the issue that you may have seen across the state when it comes to supply chain issues and businesses and startups, and also the barriers and challenges you've seen over the last year and trends.
So you want me to come in and thread all this together? That's perfect, because that's what Startup Colorado does. So it's an honor to be on this panel because we work closely with everyone here, from Mark to Azarel to Elizabeth. So, and that's what we do. So quickly, a little bit about Startup Colorado. So, when you hear the word startup, it sounds like a noun. We would argue that it's a verb at its core, and that really we need lots of people starting lots of things up, to Azarel's point about what's really at the heart of entrepreneurship, and that all of our communities need different things. So for us, startups are from the farm to the spaceship, right? And everything in between, a level playing field for all of our ideators and everybody taking a risk to go into business across the state. And what we do is help thread, we talk about this concept of it takes a village, and it's easy for us to hear that and to know that. And then there's the difference of really understanding that. And so What we do at SUCO is to help look at the village from a state level to a regional level to a local level, and all those layers of community and village that we play inside of, and to help thread all of that together so that as entrepreneurs come into our network and onto the playing field, we can help get them to the right front door in the shortest distance possible, facing their next challenge, their next opportunity. And so that's why we work so closely with ecosystem builders like our panel today across the state. And of course, many of you on the call. So, what we love about our job at Startup Colorado is I realized this year I've probably been to more towns in Colorado than most, along with Mark, for sure. Mark and I've really covered some territory, and people become very close friends and acquaintances because of the commitment to the work and the passion for the work. So that's just a little bit about the background of Startup Colorado and how we work as a really relational network organization with interest in the health of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So what I hear today is I completely back everything these people are saying, from Azarel's point and really looking at like the opportunity of the community microloan fund and more community funds and regional funds, that ability to help somebody with that smaller early stage capital of $5,000 to $75,000, right? So that they can gear up and get ready for the playing field and the kind of ecosystem that Mark and his team are fostering, and ready for the programs that Elizabeth is building, right? So that we can really seed that early stage top of funnel. Which brings us to your point about unicorns. And when I was asked to speak on this, I said, you want me to talk about unicorns? I don't really believe in them. I don't get that excited about unicorns, but I'm into startups. But I think what we can remember, and this is important because we do know unicorns exist in the sort of tech scale world in business, but they're not, and we have to remember that every unicorn was essentially a startup at one point. But that's where we get most excited about them, is that really pivotal moment when they're coming onto the playing field and all that potential and opportunity is in front of them. It's their grittiest moment. It's their most exciting moment. And when we look at unicorns from a community perspective or an economic development perspective, where I get cautious is, you could go place one big bet to work on courting or attracting a unicorn. And then of course, there's always a future risk of placing that one big bet, and you're always at risk of exits and mergers and acquisitions and other things that sometimes for that gain could be a large future loss. And we see how that plays out in different communities at different times when you suddenly had that 100 jobs and now you don't. And when we think about that from an economic perspective, while we talk a lot about economic diversification anymore, I've really shifted my thinking to think about economic balancing, because I think what we've done in our capacity as humans with thinking about economic diversification is we have created a way for us to go chase a next thing, meaning like one next thing. So we might say we're a tourist economy, certainly in rural parts of Colorado, and we want to diversify away from that. And so you'll see an economic play to go chase one other industry or one other thing, versus thinking in terms of diversifying, the goal being to diversify. But if we think about the economic scales, really we want to balance them. We want to keep those scales balanced so they're agile and always in play. And so if we go chase one big thing like a unicorn or one big industry, our scales may still be at risk, because tourism or that industry could do this. Versus if you had lots of little levers moving on your scale, you might have more balance and agility and resiliency inside your economy. So that's why we get excited, looking at the placement of one big bet on a unicorn. And while that could be exciting and be a real game changer for a community, that comes with lots of different components that we have to look at. And why not look at placing more small bets and looking at investing in startups? And so what I'll talk a little bit about is some case study around, not just both tiers of really looking to the work that Azarel and Elizabeth are doing and really supporting and growing the startups that you have, because there's potential in every community. There's a viable startup, or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 20, depends on the community. And there's lots of amazing things happening. But also there's a really interesting play to recruiting startups. And that's where we've had some success in small numbers in rural Colorado. But I think why startups are also really exciting in terms of investment. So if you attract a unicorn, they often come with a bulk of their staff. They're going to come with lots of different kind of needs, expectations, and a different kind of cost or price point, right, in terms of incentives and attracting them. You could make that same investment into startups. And what's great about investing in startups is in their early phases of growth, that's where we're going to see the most job creation. So that's where you're going to get the bulk of the local job creation. That's what we see across the country. They're going to become really built into the fabric of the community, I believe, because when you invest in a startup in your community, they see that the village raised them, and so they're really invested there. Certainly in our work with rural entrepreneurs, their dedication to jobs, community, and the local economy is pretty unprecedented. I also love startups and investing in startups because I think they double down as workforce development. They all hit points, to Elizabeth's and Mark's point around, how do they grow their team and attract the talent? But in a startup, you don't have your C-suite. So you're raising people from within the company, and you see people evolve into those jobs. I know telecom companies who will tell you their key VPs came to them and their previous job was being the manager at a Subway, and it's their best employee ever. So there's a really interesting play in how you find the right people to join your mission at that moment that you're in early stage business development. And I think that's really huge and important, especially really anywhere in Colorado, but from our perspective at rural Colorado, just giving that opportunity for growth and personal and potential development. And we're seeing a lot of cool things happen in our companies. We have manufacturing companies in Montrose that are hiring high school students, and they're their best employees, right? And what a cool opportunity for that leveling up and that skill set development. Also, looking at how you package incentives for say 3 to 5 startups per year based on your budget and your assets and your resources, or, chasing that one unicorn over time, this would create a more balanced economy. And we've seen some really interesting things come through in the last many years that really excite me about public-private partnership and how we bring startups to the table in our communities. So a couple that I'll talk about. One, I've seen, and I'm not going to put communities on the spot, but one, I've seen 0% interest loans from local government given to recruit a startup to their community, and that loan was payable in agreed terms on job creation. If those terms for job creation are not met, that loan has to be paid back at 0% interest. So that's a pretty incredible opportunity. Those opportunities are available to different communities based on their budget. But I think for your community and your budget, it just depends what you have available and how could you make best use of those resources based on what a startup needs. There's also helping with commercial space access or development. And I think another really interesting place is to look at helping with that workforce development funding or credits in interesting ways that help bridge the cost of hiring people, getting them to those wages that we want to see, and how could we help offset that. And I've seen, other communities help fund and join with a private company to fund building a building. So there's been some incredible things we've seen. That's all really over the last 5 years. I hope to see more of it. What's great about this is we know from the government perspective and that local perspective, if you can find a model or, another community that took that risk to make that move, it can help local government feel empowered to take that risk in their community. And then I have one other case study for you, but I don't want to keep rambling on.
Well, let's you've allowed for so many discussion points, so many branching off points, I think, which is awesome because we could continue this discussion forever. So let's hold on that case study because we'll come back to it. But I want to first kind of both Mark and Elizabeth have mentioned some things in the chat that I want to bring up. So Elizabeth, you mentioned there might be a case for once in a while a unicorn popping up here or there because of for certain effects from it. So do you want to talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Yes. So, I fully support everything Delaney's saying and working on with diversifying. And we need, we can't put all our eggs in one basket. We need to support lots of different types of companies at lots of stages. And I'll admit, I get beat up sometimes about the occasional acquisition because of job loss or potential transition. But at the core of it, I think we need to support businesses at all different levels and all different funding types. Because the truth of the story is Scape would not be here if we wouldn't have had an exit. Because you can't go back to investors year after year if you haven't provided them a return. And so the reason we've been able to support a lot of small manufacturers, other types of businesses, is because we made it financially worth it for them, that we could keep asking them to engage in the program. And this, I believe, let Mark answer, but that's partly why they've had to shift to doing some revenue sharing in additional to equity investments in companies. Because there's very few companies that it actually makes sense to do equity and hope that there are future funding rounds and that there will be an exit. And so we have to have the more creative financing, the revenue sharing to retain ownership. Those can be a bit of a harder sell, though, to the private angel investor because the return might not be as competitive as they need. And so I just want to stress it's a balance of needing the occasional exit to keep the investors willing to support the significantly riskier small business investments. Is that, Mark, would you add to that?
No, I think you're spot on, Elizabeth. And part of that is when we have programs like both of ours, we take a portfolio approach, right? On one end of it, part of the thesis is in rural communities that we actually have a lot lower failure rate than you would in bigger markets, right? And on the other side is we're going to have more, or in the middle, you're going to have more, call it base hits, more 2 to 3x returning on capital invested. And then we still do rely on some of those outsized returns. And that is what really is going to drive the private market investment and capital to be attracted to this market and to continue to participate. And we're seeing that very much in our fund. I mentioned we've made 24 investments. We've had 3 exits to date. Those returns are ranging anywhere from 2 to about 8x so far. And our portfolio does have like this nice makeup that ranges that entire scale. But again, I think it's critical to have that diversification, even from an investment lens, when you're thinking specifically equity or anything like equity. I mean, debt has similar dynamics, but works slightly different.
And I'm curious too, on this issue, because Delaney, 100%, I mean, EDA exists to help communities diversify their economies any way possible. And I think you highlighted how it's so important that entrepreneurship and homegrown business startups help do that diversification in a natural way and in a way that is right for that community, because that's where the business is starting up. I'm curious too, though, for everyone on the panel, if they are seeing there's what kind of threat there is for businesses that do become the success story and leaving the state, instead of the businesses that grow and stay within the community and continue to create those high-paid, high-skilled jobs, as EDA likes to say. So I'm curious of thoughts on that, on what mechanisms or what you've seen maybe in your work that lends itself to favor businesses that will not only succeed but stay within their community.
I think what we're seeing, a lot of it boils down to the hiring challenges. If these communities have the skilled workforce that can help the business continue to grow, then there's no need for these businesses to need to leave the area after an acquisition. But we also have to take stock of the workforce and the skill set that are available in some of these communities, and that could be what's hindering these businesses getting to the next level. And then there's also the other component is that they need lots of capital to get to that level. And so if the community and the region doesn't have that capital to continue to support the growth, then the business might potentially leave. And so I personally, and I'm going to guess Mark is excited as well, about the exits and activity that we have brought more resources to the area that now our investors in communities can support the homegrown businesses, increasing through those stages so that they hopefully don't ever have to leave.
And I think having capital that is coming from Colorado sources plays really big into it. I know Fastgate and Carbondale, Agile Space in Durango, who I already mentioned, CloudRise in Grand Junction, Quiet Cat and Eagle, Campground Booking in Montrose, all are examples where we've had very explicit conversations with the founders about their interest in having us participate, certainly included making sure that they had somebody to help weight the scale with other potential investors or acquiring parties so that then when they enter those negotiations, they have an anchor here who can help, not only talk about further capitalization, but help with talent acquisition and some of the other dynamics they face.
Certainly.
It looks like Azrael has her hand up, so I'll wait. And Azrael, you go.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. They didn't want to interrupt. I think that just kind of going back to like the case study side of this, one that I would like to present that I think kind of helps with this question is we have an amazing women-led business in the San Luis Valley located out of La Jara by Dia Espinosa. She's actually a member of one of our advisory boards. And she, although a transplant to the Valley, she's originally from San Diego. Her husband's from the Valley. And that community connection is really strong. And I know that money's important. I know that financials are important. I know that there's all these like things that are important, but making that community buy-in and community connection is huge. And I will also like to say that I know with product businesses, it might be different than service-driven businesses, but being open to the flexibility of maybe your headquarters are in Colorado, but having that diversity to be able to offer your service nationwide or internationally. Dia Espinosa in particularly has a consulting business that does environmental planning. So like archaeology, geology, geography, stuff like that. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in that because I'm not. But she herself, I mean, she started her company with just a couple of remote employees, but now it has grown to the fact that she's able to bring really good paying wage jobs into La Jara. And that means that people are able to afford homes, and it's really driving some of that other financial economy of a very, very small town and allowing her tools to do other types of investments. So I think there is a huge advantage in home growing this talent, because don't get me wrong, yes, it is important to recruit and bring other companies in, but you can develop that emotional connection to the communities like long term, but supporting these homegrown folks and these homegrown ideas is truly super vital. And I think long term it's more sustainable.
Azrael, I can't agree more violent agreement than I can say, because what you're talking about is the social capital that is developed within the community and the businesses that are starting up there. Whereas, just to put it into a clear light, when you're talking about the Amazon 2.0s, when you're talking about the businesses that are going to come in and be the saving grace, what they're doing? They're looking for the lowest price they can get. They're looking for the best tax credits they can get. And so they're shopping around. Whereas what you're talking about is this is the community's, entrepreneurship system and businesses that have that connection at that local level that want to see the community grow just as much as they want to see their business grow. And I think that's a huge kind of factor that to include. And Delaney, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, I would just say, I think that's a perfect point that Azrael makes. And, and to just make sure to clarify kind of the two tracks, it's like recruiting an outside unicorn, think about that one big bet and what that means, but growing them from inside to the kind of the work that Mark and Elizabeth are doing. Exits are going to happen. Lots of things are going to happen. Companies are going to grow, maybe that means, and that's where we can get better at working together as a state, is how do we help keep them in this state? How can they grow here? Maybe they can't have everything they need in one community, but could they have another facility or some aspect of their business in another town in the region or across the state? And that's something that we see entrepreneurs, not even at the exit stage, dealing with. Companies that are growing, I've seen companies grow 100% during 2020. They only have 5 employees right now, and they're already asking themselves, can I stay in my small rural town where I'm at? Based on certain economic dynamics. But the one thing I'll say, just to kind of wrap what everyone has said here, is you would be hard pressed. I would doubt it's even really exists that there's any company that wants to leave the community they're in, or certainly wants to leave Colorado. So we have that going for us regardless. Nobody wants to leave.
Just to share one conversation I had at the end of the pitch series, 2 funders from the front range, Greenline Ventures and the fund Rockies, who are both running capital tracks. But at the end of it, the thing that they said and all agreed that impressed them the most was directly to Azrael's point. The folks that they found through the pitch series that applied across the state were so close to their markets and the actual problems. It wasn't ethereal, right? It wasn't intellectual. It was these are the folks, the entrepreneurs that are living and breathing the problems, and they know that. And with a little bit, It's not for lack of competence, it's for lack of resources most of the time. And how do we put resources around those folks who know these problems and invest in them in the right ways, using the broad term of investment, and grow them where they want to be and where they're closer to their problems. And that is the interesting thing to them as funders and capital players as they look to these markets. So that's what they're actually interested in and wanting to put their money behind. And I think that ends up, it kind of drove like a secondary conversation of, okay, what's the goalpost? And I think it's relevant for all of us on this call. Is it unicorns, or is it, is it a Main Street business? And I think we can agree both can be great in certain contexts. We kind of landed more on like the economic development lens, being more of $5 to $10 million companies is a great kind of benchmark for the types of businesses that will help really drive economic development in our communities. And we'll have outliers on both sides of that equation. I used to say when we were in Telluride, I recently moved to Ridgeway, by the way, so talk about it in past tense, but my work in Telluride with the Venture Accelerator there in the Telluride Foundation, we'd say we wanted to help create $5, $10 million businesses in the next 10 years. And we did some of the math. And if we looked at $5, $10 million businesses, the average $10 million company employs 30 people at a wage of $70,000 in the startup context. And so, and we look at that, there's some other data that supports the jobs, the value of those jobs. Kaufman had something, it was like 83% more valuable are the skill sets that come from those jobs, not just, the wages that are included and the social and community aspect that they really drive. So I think just one thing that I'd love to help drive a conversation around is what are our goalposts collectively through the lens of economic development, and how do we align resources, types of capital, programs, support, right, to support them on their journey.
So that's a great question, and I think that's you kind of reversed on me, because I was going to say, hey, what's the one thing that you would recommend to all economic developers that are on this call and communities on this call that would help make your jobs easier as you're helping to support these businesses? So that's something that I think we all need to be thinking about, and maybe the paper is a great kind of place where the paper that Kim mentioned is going to be developed. We can kind of think through that question and where we want those goalposts to be. I do want to make sure that we are addressing all questions. I know there were some. Randall had made some questions in the chat, and I want to make sure we're addressing them. I wasn't quite able to follow it, Randall. So if you want to come off mute and talk about giving, I think it may be workforce related and providing the right skill sets. Is that accurate?
Hi. I think we've all evolved to do more Zoom meetings, more WebEx, to really hire and bring in people that are in different places in the country that can help us create the technology we need to get to the next level. And I think that's going to open up opportunities to keep a business in Steamboat or Durango and bring in talent from Philadelphia to help us move to the next level. That might not have been the same situation 3 to 5 years ago, because we can't get them to move here. We have no houses for them to live in. We have no apartments for them to live in. There's no place to go in our community right now. But, we can still bring them in and tie them into our organization through online support.
Great point.
Yeah, I think the rigidity of some of the definitions of businesses having to be located in one place, right? Remote work is something now more ubiquitous than it's ever been. And I know even we get pressure. Where are the jobs being hired and where are they coming from? And it ends up being a little short-sighted, because the companies have to be remote these days for any number of reasons. And I agree, we kind of need to shift our definition of what a company looks like in the next couple decades.
Well, I would just
go ahead.
add to that, as we, think about goalposts and the dynamism of companies and how they can work across locations. But similarly, when thinking about economic development strategy is beyond your own community or county. And it's certainly something we talk about in rural development a lot because of the importance of regionalization. It's what can your community do really well? What's its strengths and its assets, and how can it work with its neighbors to continue to solve together. And that's something we see a lot of success with and continue to see grow across the state, and things really exciting.
Certainly. Maybe we want to, just because I know, Mark, you had mentioned an example of how the supply, and it clear was a supply chain issue, but I love the fact that one of the businesses that you had supported and have been working with were able to transition from a national supply chain usage to a local one. I mean, that's got to be the right kind of situation, I think, for the right kind of place. But can you talk a little bit about how that happened and how difficult that was for them to be able to transition to a local supply chain?
Yeah, well, they actually had, I think it was more the value. So Connie Baker, the head distiller for Marble Distilling, which is based in Carbondale, led a panel at West Slope Startup Week last week. And this was the crux of the conversation, because everybody around her was talking about supply chain issues. And she kind of raised her hand and said, actually, we've made a commitment to being one of the most sustainable distilleries on the planet. And what that has done is not only good business, but it's allowed her supply chains to be so much more sustainable because she gets her grains locally. She drops off the spent grains a couple miles away at a farm where they get reused, right? They get the water locally. It's everything is so much easier to work with and so much more sustainable in all senses, both economically and environmentally. And I think the power of that, and especially in the macro climate, as we think about where the world's heading, is just a great lesson in the value and the real dollars that you can put on establishing and pushing for those local supply chains.
Yeah, certainly. That's a great example. One thing that I wanted to kind of think about, and we've kind of talked through it to some degree, but I'm curious if there's anything that stands out, in conversations that I've had with other folks in the entrepreneurial system. There's been, there have been some industries, some trends in particular areas. For example, as Randall had mentioned, Zoom is now being used. So online communications, the ability to work remotely, which gets to the broadband infrastructure needs of the communities. But there have been businesses such as virtual, what's the word I'm looking for when someone signs something officially, but having a process to be able to do that virtually, and other notaries, virtual notarization. That's what I'm thinking of. But there've been businesses like that. The biotech industry obviously has been really focused in and zeroed in on the mRNA vaccine process. I'm curious though, and for everyone on the panel, have there been any specific industries or trends that you're seeing that have taken advantage of the new needs that have arisen within the state from the pandemic?
One of the things that we've noticed, though, was definitely like a niche, like business that we saw grow during the pandemic was food trucks. Because I know food trucks in like Boulder and Fort Collins, some of those areas were already kind of like becoming a thing, or were already like very much like a thing, but not so much in rural Colorado. So we started a food truck loan program, and we've seen a total of 3 different food trucks come out of that. And that's been really interesting. That again, need for good food that's quick, easy, but also safe, social distance. You're not at a restaurant. It's out. You can outdoors. So that's been one thing that we've noticed in our service areas and increasing. And that's also come with like different needs for technical assistance around, well, you want a food truck. Well, how do you get a food truck and how do you run it? And how do we make sure that you're up to code and all those different things?
Yeah, certainly. And I'm curious if, because when you mentioned food truck, that then also gets to the supply chain, local supply chain, connecting to markets, because now you're talking about the food industry. And I know in whether it's the eastern part of the state or the western part of the state, the added value in the food industry is definitely a focus, and it's focused on also local supply chain, at least within the state, and being able to connect to the markets. This may not be for food trucks locally, but for produce and for added value produce and agricultural products, being able to then connect to the markets in Denver, as so that they don't have to use the national supply chain systems that may be overburdened during the pandemic. I'm curious if you've seen a lot anyone else has seen, in addition to food trucks, the food industry and adding value into what Colorado is great at doing on both the east and west parts of the state.
I think a great example there, Trent, is what Mark Maddock and his team in Pueblo are doing. And they have had a huge growth in food companies and ag tech generally around them. They have a big event that they're in response, a big event that they're putting together in November called the Pueblo Sun and Soil Water Summit, I believe. And so, yeah, you're starting to see these actually, I think, manifest in conferences and everything else. I think there's a whole host of other outdoor industry conferences. It was almost more validation for many of that, not to mention the incredible market growth that happened, whether it's Gunnison, Montrose, Junction, many of those communities really rallying around that.
Yeah.
One thing I would add really quick to the trends along the lines of what Azrael is saying as well, across the state, we're seeing pockets of entrepreneurs solving for housing in unique ways. And whether that's the unique container hotel and homes happening in Florence. We have another entrepreneur working hard to get a community off the ground in Rifle. So I think those are things important to lean in on as well.
Certainly. And I'm gonna take that as an opportunity to let our host, the Workforce Development Office, and highlight the need for that skilled workforce for those housing startups, because that's also a crux, and it's a crux not only in the housing, but as Elizabeth mentioned, in the tech arena and in other areas where specific skill sets are required that we want to be able to provide within the state, so that they can help, that their own community can take on those jobs. So that's a great example. Thank you, Delaney.
Yeah, we've seen I just counted 6 different companies in the housing manufacturing solution segment, specifically on manufacturing, all the way from Buena Vista to Junction, all over the place. And I think 4 of the 6 have popped up in the last 12 to 18 months.
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
one of for some reason, so we've had a slew of manufacturing companies the last few years. The majority of them have been the outdoor industry, which is great for the Colorado story, as a whole, about people coming here to enjoy the outdoors and then the products that are produced. We've got a young guy making a new style of mountain bike pedals. We've got insulated outdoor equipment. And then also Timber Age is a cross-laminated timber manufacturer that we've been working with that has seen a great increase in need because of the pandemic and disruptions to the supply chain, but also the cost of wood and availability. And so they too are working on some modeling for more affordable housing building solutions.
And that would be a natural trend. I didn't even think of it until you said it, but the fact that so many more folks this last year have wanted to go outside. And so the outdoor rec industry has definitely been in demand. That's great. So it looks like we got another poll coming up, a poll question. I'm going to click yes for my community. I was just talking to UC Boulder about the quantum technology field and what that means in quantum industries. And that's probably not at the point of startups quite yet, because to be a startup in the quantum technology, you need to mortgage your house just to buy the equipment for a quantum business. But that maybe is a good segue to talk about other high cost impediments maybe that startups have across the state that you've noticed, in whether it's equipment costs or Elizabeth, you've already mentioned skill set of employees and level of skill needs. But what are there other barriers that you've seen are common across the startups that you've supported? Anyone? Bueller? One I'll just note one, and this is your neck of the woods, Delaney, and your former colleagues at the ICE Lab. I know that Western State University had recently had a discussion with on their want and desire to partner with a CU that has an engineering campus there, and to help with they're realizing a lot of the startups in the ICE Lab, which is the business incubator located in Gunnison, that they are having a hard time when they do need manufacturing needs, where they would have to leave the community to go to where that infrastructure exists. And so they're looking at the possibility of helping to develop that bridge manufacturing capability for these startups. So once they do get to a point where they're beyond prototype, they've seen a successful model, but they just can't scale just slightly, not massive scale, but enough so that they can meet the demand that they're seeing. How do you fix that in a community that may not be known for manufacturing? I wish Longmont existed everywhere, but it doesn't. So how can we, so I know that that's been something that at least in one area of the state, they've been looking at. I'm curious if that's something that other areas as well.
Yeah, I mean, very much. I mean, manufacturing is a big one, and there's a lot of opportunity there. I think in Colorado, we see so many people, whether it's outdoor industry specific or not, we see a lot of manufacturing. We're tactile people, certainly in rural, and we like to build things. So manufacturing is going to continue to be a pressure point, but also a really great opportunity. And so you can look at a Longmont, but I continue to look and study without any answers for that's again how we develop as regions. And so, we can't have all the things available in every tiny community, but how can we have them available in the region, in the right place, and make those investments in infrastructure, which will be jobs, which will help those companies grow. And that's where that comes in, because a community like Gunnison and Crested Butte, where the ice lab is, I mean, you're talking 16,000 people in a county, in a resort county, and then in Gunnison, where that opportunity largely exists to develop more manufacturing. You're a community of 6,000 people. So, how do you do that? And then where do we look at the behavior patterns, the traffic patterns, the transport patterns to think about where do we best position some of these things for our companies? And I think it's a really cool opportunity for public-private partnership, a really cool opportunity for jobs and skill set development. And I think it would really put Colorado on the map in a big way nationally, because I think this is a big one that people will continue to try to solve for, certainly in the rural context across the country.
Awesome.
One other example just to share on some of the trends, cybersecurity. We've noticed a handful of companies pop up. One good example would be CloudRise in Grand Junction, and Rob, Hillary, and Joe, who are the founders there, are not just invested in the company, but they're working with CMU Mesa up there to do a whole internship program. And what they found is it's going to be hard to find talent anywhere, and they're going to have to develop it and grow it from the bottom up, no matter where they are. And so being able to go back to a community that they have roots in and work directly with the university to develop kind of custom engineer a program, right, is a huge opportunity for them. And they've also created an association for other companies in the space. And I think they've got over a dozen members now, and those are all outside of the Front Range in cloud and cybersecurity. So they're kind of helping, direct the talent development pipeline as well through their work with Mesa.
Well, that's a great example. And that's something that the need is even on the Front Range, because EDA partnered with UCCS just last year to do a cybersecurity training in the National Cybersecurity Center that's located in Colorado Springs. So the fact that CMU is now looking at this too is a great sign, and proof of the trend is real. So that's a great example. And I know Brian had mentioned the wood industry and forestry work and cleaning and supply services, as well as mentioned, and in addition to the outdoor rec, in addition to the housing needs. And these are all these are Colorado demands. So it makes sense that Colorado startups are taking this on. So that's awesome. Well, we're nearing close to needing to wrap up. But before we do, I want to make sure that if there's anyone on the panel that has any saved rounds, as they say it in DoD, that they want to talk through any issues, they want to make sure that the audience is able to hear about the entrepreneurial system and how we as economic developers can help support it in Colorado. So I'll leave it a pause to see if there's any last comments from anyone, and then we can, if not, we'll see if there's any questions. And then after that, I'll hand it back over to Kim. So panelists, any last words?
One quick thing that I would love to mention is I know we are talking a lot about industry, which is super important, but one other thing that I like to mention is, we all in this world have all seen Elizabeth Gardner with the State Demographics Office, presentation about where our population is coming from, and that growing trend that our spending dollar population tends to be millennial and Hispanic. And one of the things that I know that we focused on, and I will encourage everyone in the economic developing world to do so, is how are we making language more inclusive as these entrepreneurs look at your community, whether it's through a website to first contact, and then feeling comfortable that a Hispanic or Latino-led business is going to be embraced in the community, or they're going to be able to find those supports, or even be able to access resources in their chosen language. So that's just one thing that I would like to throw out there.
Well, that's a great point, because we have to make sure that support is provided equitably to everybody, and language may be a big barrier. So thank you. Anyone else?
Maybe just one thing on the regional. Delaney hit on this earlier, but really making sure that we think about our communities as regional collaborators, right? I think we hear that, but practically it seems to break down, at least in the conversations I've been involved in the last 7 years on the Western Slope. But a good example is just thinking about, instead of trying to develop the capital ecosystem in Grand Junction or Montrose, why don't we build the bridges between, Telluride and the other mountain towns where the capital is plentiful, relative, right, from a specific to investing in companies. So looking at our regional strengths and weaknesses, and really thinking about our ecosystems and how we build those bridges as intentionally as possible, because not all communities can provide all things to all companies or entrepreneurs.
That's a great point, Mark. We have to work with each other and leverage each other's programs. That's 100%. We got to, and that gets to your broader point earlier of wanting to understand the goalposts. So thank you.
Yeah, and I can add to that, circling back, a case study I have that is the ICE Lab, which was looking at, Gunnison County wanted a stake in the outdoor industry. And I was running the ICE Lab at that time, and we thought, how could we do this in a unique way that makes sense with our assets based at the university there? And that became the ICE Lab Outdoor Industry Accelerator, which has just finished its second year through David Assad and the team that runs it now. And now it's the Moose Jaw Accelerator. So for that tiny community, it did a couple things. One, we could attract corporate sponsorship to help fund an accelerator over time. And it was a little, it's a national accelerator. It'll go out and scrape those, really early stage companies, those startups from anywhere in the country to come to Gunnison to have this experience, not just in Gunnison, but in Colorado for their company. And while there was a little pushback from the community around, it's not just helping local companies, well, it can absolutely help local companies too. And they can apply too, but it's for everybody. But the theory and the thesis behind it was, once those companies come here, they're going to want to stay. And some will stay in Gunnison or Crested Butte, and some will stay in the region. So it will continue to feed the region. And we've seen that successfully. So out of 2 accelerators, there's a company in Crested Butte. There's one company now, SheFly, which just won at the pitch event last week from Mark's organization, which was awesome. And she's staying in Gunnison. And there's Geyser Systems over in Montrose. So it has worked to kind of seed the region. And that's just one, kind of unique angle on how we can all lead for each other.
That's a great way to cap it off, Delaney, because I think that is a great example, and also a great, the fact that you've been working with everyone across the board, and it's helping the region out. Awesome. Anyone else? Final words for now, I should say. It's a continuing conversation. It's an evolving conversation, but for at least this conversation, anything else anyone else wants to add?
All I might add is that all of this takes a lot of time. We're all into instant gratification, but unfortunately, this is, a long game, and it takes a lot of time to get all these different components and programming and businesses to where we want them to be. And I think sometimes when we all do our fundraising stories and our presentations to the city, the county, the government to support us, it's hard to stress that this is a long game, and it takes a lot of time to get there.
To do it right, it takes a lot of work. You got to do what's hard, not what's easy. 100%, Elizabeth. That's the rub to it, but it's a good rub. It means we're working. We're all committed to making it happen. So, one last round of questions from anyone in the audience. If you want to either type it in or raise your hand, and if not, we'll give it a couple of seconds to see if anyone raises their hand or type something in. And if not, I'll hand it over to Kim for closing comments. I could do the Jeopardy beep beep music, but I won't. All right. Well, in that case, Kim, do you wanna close us out?
I sure do, once I find my mute button. I don't know if I'll ever get used to the mute. So I wanted to just say thank you to everyone in today's session. Our panelists are amazing. We've had several discussions with them over the past couple months, really researching this topic, and I just really enjoy having this discussion every time with them. I get very excited. This is why we do what we do, is to see the seeding of these wonderful, innovative ideas, and to be in the heart of this discussion has been very meaningful for me and for everyone, I hope, within this group. So thank you to our panelists today. I also want to give a big thank you to the team that is behind me and EDCC Weekly. We are in discussions every single week trying to build out our events and programming throughout this whole year. And so, hats off to our events and programming committee, and then also to our communications committee, who does the hard work behind the scenes putting these thought leadership papers together. So just to let everybody know, with a few follow-up items, again, the link in the recording and the presentation will be coming out to you soon. The thought leadership papers should be released by August 16th. And then also, Bobby is going to put in a link into the chat section. We are always looking to better our programming and our events and our topics. We also want to know, what is it that you need to know about? What is it that you want to hear from us, and how can we explore more items or more topics for you to help you in your everyday job? So please follow that link to our survey. It's a very quick 5-minute survey, and we really appreciate the information that you share with us. Again, we have all of our events and programming up on this webpage. Just go to edcconline.org/events calendar, and you will find all of our programming. And like I said, our early bird registration is now open and live for our Drive Lead Succeed conference in Steamboat. We want to see everyone there. We're excited. We can't wait. And I can tell you that we are following all CDC guidelines, and the hotel that we're at, the Steamboat Grand, has assured us that they are taking every necessary protocol to keep everyone safe. Again, you can find all of this information at edcconline.org. Please take care, stay safe, and can't wait to see all of you in October. Thank you so much.